Well, good afternoon from London and welcome to Colour It Stone. This is a webinar devoted to two subjects really. One, the abstract and psychological question of the use of colour in architecture and its effects. And the other, of course, the physicality and the texture of stone as a material, which of course can't really be experienced on screen. It can be experienced in real life, but we can certainly discuss it on screen, which is what we're going to do this afternoon. And shortly, we'll hear presentations, firstly from Gurkan Karakush, writer, curator, proselytizer, I think it's fair to say, for the virtues of stone, not just produced in Turkey, but stone in general. But he is an expert on the whole Turkish scene. And then following him, Craig Copeland from Pelly Clark and Partners, an architect, but also a sculptor and an artist with a profound interest in the use of stone, both for its textural and its color virtues, properties, characteristics, or attributes. Before we come to our main speakers, I'd like to invite a comment from my World Architecture Festival colleague, Jeremy Melvin, who's been curator at WAF since 2008. And Jeremy, I think it's fair to say that while we've seen many winners at WAF, which have used stone as a material, it perhaps hasn't had the kind of emphasis that certain other building materials have had, because they get very specifically promoted by certain, trade organizations or whatever it might be. Stone, in a sense, is a kind of the universal, it's always been there. I wonder if you have some observations about this.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. It seems to me that stone has three great virtues in architectural applications. One is it lasts a very long time. I mean, I know that if you take the great Gothic cathedrals, most of them are now on their third or fourth generation of stones making the same building. But stone basically lasts pretty well, which is why most monuments tend to be made out of stone, certainly traditional monuments. The second great virtue it has, I think, is texture. And the texture of stone, of course, can vary very, very widely, from being smooth, almost like a mirror. You can almost use it as a sort of semi-reflective material. You can certainly reflect light off it. But it can also be quite rough. It can be quite tactile. I'm thinking of something like Palladio's Palazzo Tieni in Vicenza, where there's a sort of brooding menace to the roughness of the stone. And then the third great virtue is a variety of colour that stone offers. Now, obviously, some stones have a wide variety of colour themselves, but if you talk about, or again, think about the great late medieval buildings just before the Renaissance in northern Italy, they use stone in a polychromatic way. So I think stone has got an enormous range of virtues in architectural expression. But I also suspect that for those reasons, it was rather tended to be shunned by modernists, because stone actually told you what a building would be, whereas the modernist dream was that the mind of the architect would create the form and everything else. So materials like concrete came to the fore. So I think that may be a part answer to your question, which is why have we not seen so many really great stone buildings at WAF?
I think it's an interesting point about that, which is the extent to which, I mean, rather like brick, one makes a distinction between a structural material and what these days can be a cladding material. One of the big changes, I suppose, in the world of stone in recent years has been the extent to which it can be part of a cladding system rather than being load-bearing. And as I say, rather like brick, this rather transforms the attitude of the architect or the designer to how they're using it. There's a certain, what you see is what you get as cladding, but what you see isn't what you get as a structural load-bearing piece of masonry, as it were, the sort of fortress or castle syndrome.
Yes, I think that's right. That you know, architects or modernist architects in particular are very suspicious of you know, a thin sheet of cladding around a building that could be seen to mitigate against reading it in purely formal or structural terms. And reducing stone to a cladding material created another problem, which is that unlike if you think of the great curtain walls of Mies van der Rohe or someone like that, you know, he used materials that could be made to conform precisely to what he wanted in terms of shape and in terms of effect, texture, colour. Whereas with stone, you know, there is always a grain to the stone, there's always a quality to the stone that will talk of something other than architecture, whether it's geology or culture or whatever, you know, it could be debated endlessly. But the stone is not a neutral material, it's always an active participant in the building.
I mean, in that sense, this sounds like an advantage rather than a disadvantage. And I'm sure that Craig might have something to say about that later on. But it's a bit like, it's a bit like the argument about brick slips. I mean, is it honest to show a building which apparently is load-bearing masonry, whereas in fact bricks become tiles? I think it's a very interesting question. Quite obviously, they are authentic brick slips. And stone cladding is completely authentic stone. It's just a different use of it, and I'm wondering whether this is a big deal anymore, or whether it still holds things back.
Well, I think architects are still beholden to what I think of false premises, sort of like honesty in structure. You know, as you say, a piece of cladding can be a very honest piece of cladding. I remember my old friend and colleague Peter Blundell-Jones saying we all know what it means to have a brick wall compared to a representation of a brick wall. Well, the representation of a brick wall in, you know, vinyl or something might be a very authentic piece of vinyl trying to be a brick wall. And I'm reminded of what Ruskin says about this, who is obviously held up as one of the apostles of truth to materials. But when he talks about the effect of marbling in end papers in books, he says that although, you know, it's attempting to be marble, or it resembles marble and it isn't marble, which would make it, in those terms, dishonest. But he says it's so established as a technique that no one would think it really is marble. It's actually doing something else. And I think architects need to make that sort of adjustment to understand that, you know, stone can be a very expressive piece of cladding material, even if it's not being used structurally. There's no reason why it has to be used structurally. And I also understand that, you know, the demands of modern engineering or modern liability mean that it's difficult to use stone structurally because it's harder to calculate its strength compared to a steel column or a concrete column, and so you know, that's one of the reasons it becomes used as cladding. But then work out how to use it to make an expression out of cladding. And it seems to me that the natural grain and texture of stone can do that extremely well. It just needs some imagination.
And actually, that should be welcomed by architects, because one of the crucial things about stone, as it were, a found and amended material, as opposed to a produced material, let's say like, you know, aluminium panels or something like that. Stone up to a point is what it is, but as you said, stone can be very different depending on where it's come from and how you want to use it. It can be I'd say almost a plastic material, given today's cutting techniques and the technologies of sanding, which were known to master craftsmen, but we can replicate up to a point for use of it as a kind of mass material on large buildings. And I think at this point, this is probably an appropriate moment to bring you in, Gurkhan, on this. And please give us your wisdom, a lifetime of experience in thinking and designing with and in stone. Over to you.
Thanks, Q, Paul, and Jeremy for those comments. I enjoyed talking about architecture in stone, and I appreciate both your and Jeremy's insights and some comments. I think the architecture community doesn't get to speak as much about architecture in stone as it should because of some of the dynamics you talked about, and from the modernist period, the cladding issues. But as you both mentioned, architecture in stone has been with us for a very long time. It's influenced how we approach the construction and architecture. It's very central to both of those activities, let's say. And my job today will be to kind of show you a little bit of the past in architecture in stone from the particular geography that I'm located in. I'm here in Istanbul today. And personally, where I grew up in Turkey before I moved to the States was an area known for medieval architecture in stone. So in my childhood, I walked around various 10th, 11th century stone buildings. One of them I'll show you today. So very much it's part of the life of this geography, this architecture in stone. So let me share my screen. Okay, you all see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of slides. I'll go through pretty quickly. A lot of images, and these are all the marbles and natural stones you see here are all from Turkey and this geography. So the reason I call this the architectural opportunities of natural stone is, as Jeremy spoke, there is a certain inclination to working in stone that's been with us that has changed perhaps in the last 100 years. And these inclinations are the ones I want to talk about a little bit today. So we're going to speak a little bit about history of stone and architecture, specifically from Turkey. We'll look at some natural stone types from this geography, because we often talk about marble and we often talk about perhaps travertine, but there's a wider variety of natural stones that do exist and are used in different ways. And then we'll look at some examples in contemporary architecture, most of them from Turkish architects. As Paul said, I'm a proselytizer for also architecture from Turkey. So why natural stone? Just quickly, natural stone is unique. Each stone sits in a certain geology under the earth for many, many years and produces its own texture and color, which is the subject of our presentation, colored stone. So it's very distinctive. It endures and marks time. As Jeremy mentioned earlier, this marking of time is something that stone really provides for in monuments and things like this. It provides some structural integrity with diverse textures. And it has this mix of beauty, strength, and durability, which I think provides different applications, but in some ways very flexible, but also provides different opportunities for the architect in terms of design. And of course, it's natural. I mean, it's been sitting in the ground, and there's a wide variety of cuts and colors, but it's a natural material that dates back to the origins of human civilization. And how does that do that? This is a monument from Turkey. It's called Göbekli Tepe. It's about 12,000 years old. It's a series of monoliths around a central monolith on top of a hill in central Anatolia. It's this project, the archaeological project here, has kind of rewritten some of the history of early civilization, about how we went from hunter-gatherers to sedentary life. So the first examples of sedentary life are examples in stone. In the Turkish geography, we quickly move, this is about 10,000 years later, about 9,000 years later, this is the Lycian civilization. And again, the building in stone inside of the geology and topography. This is the Lycians were known for building in monuments, also in stone. This is one of their sarcophagi, which now is in Berlin. And then quickly moving to the Greco-Roman period, we can see this is in Bergamo or Didyma, I'm not sure, but the Greco-Roman period, the expression in the different classical orders was the sort of golden era of architecture in stone. I think this is in Didyma, the Temple of Apollo, I believe. And then Ephesus later on in the Roman period. As you can see, the nature of the stone and the architecture, we have much more defined pieces of these facades, the classical orders, between the columns, the entablature gets much more expressive, much more working with the different stone bits, the textures to create these compositions. And then moves on architecture in stone to urbanism, whole streets, arcades. This is also a Roman period building in Ephesus, a street where we have stone both as pavement and as part of the arcade in the main street. Later on, this is building, this is in Pamukkale, which is in Denizli. Hierapolis is the name of the city, and this is all travertine. Again, you can see how stone, it's a kind of field, it's a continuous fields of stone, both as large pavement stones to these more simpler. This is a market area, so you can see that the order then is simplified for this more functional and mercantile part of town. The expressive nature of the stone is here is in a much more simplified language. This is in travertine. And you can see also beginning masonry systems in the Roman period, such as these stone arches and stone gateways. Turkey also has some interesting sort of sidelights in natural stone. This is obviously the Cappadocia area where during the early Christian period, architecture and geology were mixed such that a piece of natural stone was then turned into a building, kind of sort of confusing and conflating architecture and geology. Here we can see that the natural stone slabs, rocks have then become carved out to create and then painted to create an architectural condition. You can't really call this a building as much as it's an opportunity to create a space by a negative act of architecture, which is a negative act of construction. So this is an interesting proposition in stone. And the thing that from the part of the world that I grew up in, this is in Kayseri. I grew up near here, and this is medieval Turkish stone architecture from the Seljuk period. And the elaborate carving techniques of this period are quite well known and provide a maximum expression of these more volcanic stones in basalt and andesite. These are particular to this area. And this is lastly Mardin, where you can see a whole hillside of settlements in all natural stone masonry. So that's sort of the background of this geography that I'm from. And the architecture is very much guided by the types of stones that we have here. And I'm going to go quickly through these 5 types and sort of try to give you an example as of how one can build with these stones and these natural stones. First, I'm going to get like marble. Marble is a metamorphic rock, and it is a softer stone, primarily made of calcite. Marble is known for its colored veining, and its veining causes certain mineral deposits. Often those mineral deposits are what you see in that vein, and that vein's color qualities based on whatever mineral deposit it encounters creates these unique conditions. These are marbles from Turkey that are quite well known. Anatolia, Anadolu And we have from these beiges and whites to the famous Marmara marble, which is near Istanbul, to various travertines. So this color palette is the color palette that you find a lot of buildings in this geography. And I think it's one of the important aspects of marble is its translucency, has a certain depth. You can see here this sculpture from Anatolia from the Hellenic period. There's a certain, the light actually moves inside the marble and bounces around a little bit, comes back out. So that translucency really makes the surface of the marble quite active surface, because it's absorbing the light. The light is then bounces back out to kind of create these interesting conditions. It adds significance and substance to space in terms of its color. This is a project in Turkey by Mustafa Toner, and you can see the different veining and the different colors and the different patterns used, this unique veining patterns. Obviously, some of the sources of this are in architecture from Turkey. You know, one of the four famous examples is the Hagia Sophia Byzantine Church, built in the 16th century AD, which used marble as the most expressive aspect of its architecture. The Byzantine period was downplayed for many, many years because of this expressive, coloristic quality when compared to the classic Greco-Roman style. Byzantine architecture was seen as something backward, but I think we now know that its use of coloring it was quite unique. All these different marbles were collected from throughout the Byzantine Empire of the time to create these different surfaces and different techniques from as west as Italy to Africa. All of these different types of marbles here were used both structurally, but I think importantly with the interior decorative program to kind of create this fusion. You can see here this what we call book match, where you take one slab of tile and then you turn it out. A marbling technique that Jeremy was mentioning actually has its sources in some of these decorative aspects of marble. But also, if you look up here, you know, we have these carved bits with mosaic bits. So this kind of union of carving, decorative, and the veining, I think, shows the opportunity of one and the different colors. And these marbles are 1,500-year-old marbles, but they're quite vivid in their expression. The same marble as you can see here today in interior. There's not that much difference in the color. This Elazar cherry. Color pattern and texture finish are the most important. We can see here in Marmara marble, which has this natural striping. You can use it to create the same kind of surface qualities with the geometric orientation of the veins, and then use that with different tiling techniques. The cladding is an issue that Paul talked about. So we have different cladding techniques. Just wanted, you know, this is a building by Tabanlıoğlu, so we have handset cladding, which is put on load-bearing fixtures. So these kind of systems are widely prevalent in our field, working with cladding systems and different mechanical fixings in architecture. But you can also use cladding. You can use a marble surface as a rain screen with a back ventilation into an interior drainage cavity. So we have this flexibility in terms of the different cladding systems now, is allowing for ventilation and allowing the marble surface to be much more articulated, as you can see here. It provides spatial continuity marble. And I think that's what's important. You know, one material used in different ways, and I think we'll see that in Craig, can create a kind of unified and a continuity in spaces going from outside to inside. So let's quickly look at some of the different ways you can treat these surfaces. Just very quickly, you can bush hammer it, you can tumble it, which gives, you know, the bush hammer gives you a little bit of a surface there, slightly some cracks that allow for light to bounce off of it. Tumbled, honed is a little bit more reflective. Sandblasted, again, it's less detail on the surface. Brushed and polished, which you often see. You can also carve marble. I think this is something we found now in the last 10 years, carved marble surfaces in different geometries. Travertine, it's actually a variety of limestone It has its origins in subterranean mineral springs, is where cold water, where hot water comes out. And clay travertine is very popular. It's a little bit less expensive than marble, and but has the same patterns and understated colors. And in Turkey, we have a variety of colors based on whatever minerals you have. And it creates a kind of informality. Here we have some big split face travertine blocks. And then also we have different surfaces, tumble, filled and honed of, I like to show this slide because this is actually where you can see, this is actually real travertine in terms of it hasn't been processed. And you can imagine the hot water was gurgling through here for millions and millions of years and creating this very unique geometry. And then we get to have this, in our backyard or in our interior. I think this is very unique mineral conditions. And you can see the different travertines there. Let's not forget that patterns, tiling, and coursing are an important issue. We have many, many different over history, Renaissance, Greek, Roman, different patterns and coursings that we can use. I think this is architects should look a little bit deeper into these kind of coursing techniques as a way to kind of give character to individual features of their architecture. Limestone, it's a little bit softer natural stone. Again, in Anatolian geography, we have a lot of limestone. It was used often in Ottoman architecture, especially here in Istanbul, because we have lots of limestone quarries nearby. It's very soft and easy to process. So you can see here these limestone, this is a limestone wall from here in Istanbul, but you can also give it, here's a modern application, making it a more lean and more spare geometry. And the last two type of stones, I'd like to do this because I think we don't get a chance to talk about all these different types of stones, so bear with me a little bit. We have basalt and andesite, which are igneous stones. These are coming out of lava. They're much more durable and resistant to corrosion and pollution, very ecologically oriented. Basalt, you can use them both interior and exterior. They look like this, but you can make them look like this. They're very natural material. Cut them down, you can make them into natural stone walls. The andesite comes in a nice reds and in wall textures like this, but also can be carved. Much of these medieval architecture in Turkey is made from these kinds of volcanic stones. Dolomite, not a very well-known stone, but again, from our geography, it's a little bit harder than marble. It's known as Marmara white, very much used in sculpture in the Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman times. You can see it here as gravel. Here's some, but very hard and very crystalline, as you can see. And then its veining is very particular because it's so hard. The water doesn't have an opportunity to go down as much, so it goes across the existing veins. And lastly, onyx. This is a very rare and exotic stone, translucent, and it's an accent feature. This is what it looks like in a raw state. This is what it looks like in a slab state, and this is what usually most people see it as backlit with these different. The onyx comes from areas where there is cold water coming out. So travertine is hot water, and onyx is cold water. So the difference in the natural thermal water creates this. And I like to show this slide. This is actually, you can use onyx in a different way. You can top light it, and again, the light bounces in to the travertine, into the onyx, and creates a different condition. So I think this is another opportunity to use different types of travertines. So that's sort of the range of stones we have here in Turkey in the last 8 minutes. I'm gonna go through some buildings, look at, I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I'll take about 5 minutes. Look at some buildings by Turkish architects here in Turkey. This is Han Tümertekin Otoban. This is an old 19th century building called Salt Galata, which is now a kind of a contemporary cultural center. And this is a marble walls. You can see here by Otoban. You can see that expressive quality, changing textures, creating this articulate interior walls that works with the existing neoclassical building and these existing Marmara marble stairways. Again, Turkey and Istanbul has used this Marmara marble for many, many years because it's very close by. And you can see that you can also use both the striping of the Marmara marble, but also create a different geometry on top, these small holes down here that create a secondary geometry with the veining, and then also this three-dimensionality of the marble, where you can, each individual piece is then, it seems like it's a big block. And you can see how it also works with the pavement there, and also round pieces using the veining. We have lots of natural stone buildings in the Byzantine and Ottoman period, and we can see how marble works with that. Here, there's an Erginoğlu Çalıştay, there's an architect, there's an advertising office in Istanbul. Again, one of the andesites, this is an embassy by Han Tümerteki, Turkish embassy in Mongolia. This is in Mongolia. I don't know if anybody's been to Mongolia, but it's very cold and windy, and these buildings sit out in the open, so you need to protect as much as possible. So the andesite was used on the exterior as a facade element, and then on the interior, different kind of beiges are used. And also, andesite is a natural material. You can see how it works well with timber. Ottoman Hammam. This is by Sinan. It's the Kılıç Ali Pasha Hammam in Istanbul. It was renovated by Jafar Bozkurt architects. Here it is sitting on the street. Here's the interior. And you can see the Marmara marble again, how it works with light coming from the top, and how these contiguous marble pieces creates this very clean and organized interior, and light, water. Marble works well with water, pools, so it's an opportunity to do something with reflective surfaces and reflective surfaces with water, which this hammam is full of. This is a building I showed earlier, Toner Architects. Again, different types of marble, veining with on the ground here, water jet cut tiles. Water jet allows you to create any kind of geometry you want, and it's one of the CNC-based cutting techniques. You can see this column wrapped in marble, and then the whole interior where glass and marble work together to create a kind of union of color and light. Our presentation today is about color, and you can see how all these different colors work together. And this is a store showroom for Turkish traditional home furnishings. So you can see how carpets work well with the stone also. We talked about the softer limestones, and this is a softer limestone facade by Bonan Ekinci, also in Istanbul, creating this pattern, which then has two levels. Both it's a relief pattern, but it's also incised within that top relief layer is another geometry you see up here, quite expressive, quite vivid. And these types of limestone surfaces over time, they get harder, so it creates a different patina. Tabanlı Architects, this is a Congress center in Libya, and widespread use of onyx here. There's a huge onyx interior with working with another marble surface, and so you can see how both sunlight coming from the exterior and also this interior work together with onyx and different types of marbles on the interior. This highly active pattern on the ground here. This is Emerald Alat Architects. This is a mosque using some natural stone techniques and also concrete, and you can see water again. All these are kind of pulled together with some reinforced concrete for a mosque outside the suburbs of Istanbul. How natural stone masonry, these kind of walls create this texture, but it's kind of balanced with a appreciation of light and reflection off of water and natural elements. I find this a very biophilic building. And as a mosque, it's set new benchmarks for how mosque architecture can be organized and designed. This reinforced concrete working with the natural stone surfaces. Again, another mosque using the same principles, but with andesite in Ankara by Hilmi Güner and Hüseyin Bütüner, the Mogan Mosque. You can see that andesite surface that we talked about earlier. Tabanlı Architects, this is an exterior facade in Bodrum. We can see here both the cladding and on the interiors we have extensive use of this kind of grayish marble from the Western Aegean area. Mutlu Çilingiroğlu Küçükçekmece City Hall, we have here travertine. Travertine is seen as a kind of more simpler type of natural stone, but lately it's gained popularity because of its natural techniques, the natural veining. So I think this building, this is a municipal hall, elevated the notion of travertine in architecture in Turkey, especially as well as this building, Emre Alat Architects, the Palmarina. This is in Bodrum, where it's all different types of travertines, different coursing techniques, different textures, different colors. But again, it's all in travertine. So one material, different surfaces, different colors, simplifies really as an architect, it kind of simplifies what you're doing because you're focused on that one material, but all the different opportunities that the material presents gives you an ability to articulate your volumes and your geometries in different ways. And this was used in the advertising. This is by Owen Architects and Johnson Architects. It's a hotel. And here I like this project where you have these shiny marble interiors, but then you have these natural stone walls on the exterior. And this is in a kind of Aegean architecture. You can see here, it's the Aegean setting. Also blends in with reinforced concrete, but the interior of these marbles, working with the natural stone walls with embedded marble bits, mosaic bits. Here we have a green local marble under the pool. So, all these different stones working together to really express the character of this area in Bodrum, both the vernacular architecture, but also this green marbles working with the natural setting. On to Mertekin again, natural stone in the Aegean, the B2 house. And in this house also we have a natural stone on the wall and also on top of the building, embedded within the steel structure. Cengiz Bektaş, we have stone, concrete, timber working together. Nevzat Sahin, this is a kind of école that was in Turkey for many years, this natural stones with reinforced concrete. Nevzat Sahin, an important local architect using the vernacular. And then finishing up with a couple more last buildings, Preydak Architects, this is a building outside of Turkey in Qatar, where we have these very large split face travertine blocks on the surface, as you can see them here, very, very large, and creating this kind of facade with different, as you can see, when the sun hits it, each piece at its particular angle, particular texture, provides different appearances. And in the interior, we have a more serene, more calm beige. Gökhan Avcı Architects, again in Bodrum, with a kind of travertine facade on these elements. And a local Bodrum. And then the last building I want to show is in New York. This is by Nazım Kızılsencer. This is a facade. We talk a lot about facades, and this is this facade is actually on a composite panel. So it's a veneer stone from Turkey. I believe it's a basalt. So it's a veneer on a panel and allowing the facade to be much lighter. And also with regard to corrosion and pollution in an urban setting would be able to deal with that. And also in terms of sustainability and recyclability, it's sitting on aluminum, so it's easy to recycle. Here it's in this industrial setting in New York. Oh, sorry, I thought that was the last one. We have one last by R3, again, back on the Aegean, kind of temple-like art gallery for Arkas. So architecture, just to complete, architecture and construction, the performance, durability of natural stone is important. Installation, maintenance are the key issues we have with stone. So you want to make sure. I think this is something that Craig will talk about, all these issues. And our talk today was sponsored by Turkish Stones. It's a promotional brand promoted by the Istanbul Mineral Exporters Association. And Turkey is a homeland of natural stone, situated in the middle of the Alpine Himalayan belt. Its unique geography has many types of different stones. and the industry in Turkey takes advantage of these thousands of knowledge in stone architecture and innovative products with technology to make the luxury of natural stone accessible. Turkish stones, as we showed, this is a variety of Turkish stones, each from a particular geography of Turkey, Anatolia, Marmara, Elazığ, Muğla. You can see the natural stone quarries in Turkey with all these types I talked about today, existing throughout the geography, west and east, and also the different color opportunities. Turkey is the leading exporter with $1.8 billion exports. Very large industry that can do a lot with natural stone in architecture. So thank you very much. Hopefully I got in there on time and showed you what the possibilities, architecture opportunities of natural stone from Turkey is. Thank you very much.
I think we're now going to see a brief video. Well, thank you very much, Gürkan. That was a fascinating run through the qualities and attributes of stone and some intriguing information about how the different veining and coloring occurs as a result of very long physical processes below ground, of which we know little. And I was very struck by the, let's say, the distinction between manufactured products and what you might call refined products, the kind of raw nature of what we saw coming out of the ground, and then this incredible kind of sophisticated end product derived from polishing and cutting or texturing and roughing up, depending on what it is you want to achieve. And we're now going to ask Craig Copeland to talk to us from the point of view of a practicing architect, but his interest in stone is partly through his activities as sort of an artist and a sculptor, as well as an architect. He's working on some big projects. I think we're going to see something of an important building on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington. But Craig, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Paul. And Gürkan, thank you. That was a great presentation. I'm ready to. You pretty much covered the whole world through the perspective of Turkey. It's pretty amazing. Some really great examples and a really clear description of just the amazing possibilities with stone. And Jeremy, thank you for launching us into what I look forward to as a longer conversation after I have my presentation. Touching upon really the qualities of stone. And I think that those qualities of durability, of color, those are clearly ones that come to mind. Sustainability, the fact that it's a connection to nature, not just that it's natural, but it gives us an opportunity, as Paul was saying, we don't have the ability today to touch the stone in this conference or in this conversation. But what I'm going to be showing you today is very much this kind of this conceptual tactile aspect of stone that has been really at the core of my interest in stone. I'm very interested in the color of stone, the actual color of stone, but it's the texture of stone, not just in its final form, but also in the process. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. And so it's in line with this idea of a renewed perspective. And what I want to start with is kind of give a little bit of a background of how I've come to working with stone, and we will be, you'll see that there'll be this weaving of this theme of coloring and texture in stone. I want to start by talking about a project that I curated. It was an art exhibit with 4 artists, myself included, and it was titled Liquid Stone. And the idea was to think of stone and just to think of it in a broader sense in terms of time. Here you see 2 images juxtaposed. Both of them are moments in time, thanks to the camera. One of those moments in time is more extended, and that's typically the way we see stone. Water, on the other hand, is happening very quickly, but they're both liquid when you really think about it, especially marble. This came out of an idea that was a collaboration with an artist that I had worked with for many years, going back to graduate school, William Steiger. He and I were paired together, and on this theme of renewed perspective, we were paired because we were asked, they had 8 artists and 8 architects. This was a studio that Frank Gehry and Claes Oldenburg were teaching, and they wanted to get artists and architects to work together. It was my first chance to collaborate and really broaden my own perspectives. So what came out of that specifically was this idea of a hydrotherapy center, but more importantly was a process of collaborating, in this case with another artist. And that led, many years later to this idea of liquid stone, where we juxtaposed our ideas about time and material. And I think that's an important way to think about stone. Is that time is ever present. It's a memory of time and a reminder of time. So the one of the pieces that I showed, you see here on the right, is these 3 sprouts, and this is a conceptual piece of 3 seeds that are conceptually starting as cubes, and after a conceptual gestation of 2 or 3 months, how would those seeds, those cubic seeds, begin to germinate? And this is the way that I like to play with the idea of time and the use of stone. 2 colleagues who were also featured, you see them on the left, also play with this idea of the plasticity of stone. And these are pieces that they call Smurfs, and they are very plastic, but they're made out of the dolomitic, the very hard dolomitic stone that Gürkan was talking about. They even had a video in this particular exhibit that was an animation of one of these pieces moving around to launch your imagination into this plasticity and movement that's associated with it. But actually a precursor to this was my first hands-on carving, which you see here. This incorporated traditional pointing techniques, which is something that goes back millennia, really, in terms of building up models and then using a pointing technique where you actually go point by point. You're doing a kind of a dot to dot in 3D. And I wanted to go through this process in part to understand how you excavate stone and what happens as you excavate stone. In this case, in a very intimate way. This is what I would call a tabletop sculpture, which is a lot of my work. A few years later, I had an opportunity to do a monumental sculpture and begin some of my monumental carvings. And this particular piece, like the first one that you saw, the Anello Ritorto, this one, Anello Echo, was an opportunity to not only use traditional processes of modeling in clay, plaster, and pointing, but also to use emerging technologies with the computer to actually scan and put this in the computer, and then to then procure the blocks of stone and to do it in a somewhat methodological way, so that given the scale, it could be attained and stay on track to a certain extent. So this is me working on it, everything done with handheld tools, but again, using, to initiate this, using a combination of traditional concepts or traditional approaches, incorporating that with the computer. And what's fascinating at this scale is that really you're starting to get at a larger scale than the intimate tabletop pieces, and you really can get lost in this idea that you're immersed in this quarry of sorts. And here you see some of those steps along the way, and then the final, or as I say, the substantially complete, because there's always something that you see and an opportunity that you might want to return to. This is something that this is giving you a little bit of background from my perspective as an artist and my approach to stone. Another perspective to my approach to stone comes through the design world, and I've been very fortunate for over a decade to be teaming with a number of different stone companies in an annual event called Marmomac. And with that, there's an opportunity that the idea of Marmomac, the marmo of Marmomac is marble or stone, the mac is machines. And so this is an opportunity for companies to demonstrate their marbles, to demonstrate their fabrication, or in this case, pairing with artists, designers, and architects like myself to see what are the possibilities using contemporary tools. In this case, you see on the left a diamond wire, and the idea was to create this very thin panel, but something that's more plastic. And you could see on the right side, getting it to 2 cm, it not only has its structural integrity, but it also has a translucency. It really showcases both of those aspects. Here you see some of the concepts behind it, and then this is actually at Marmomac, where you can see the demonstration of the application of those different aspects. This continued with a number of different companies. In this case, going into the possibilities of furniture production, working with a travertine company. And again, this idea of showcasing what's possible in terms of stone. Some of the things that Gurkan was showing you, the idea of being fully immersed in stone, of creating this fully immersive environment that is, in this case, architecture, design, and art, although the art is somewhat camouflaged in this particular case. Always with these particular these fairs, there are these opportunities to kind of showcase, to study, and to showcase what each company's capabilities are. In this case, working with the idea of not just a diamond wire, but also robotic carving to create these three-dimensional columns. Again, combining traditional approaches, but using contemporary technology. And out of this, a few years back, I was invited by the overall organizers of Marmomac to collaborate with two companies I had never worked with before and come up with a way to showcase the capabilities of stone today. And what emerged out of it was this very thin cladding of stone that is actually on a double curve, and it's attached to these metal, this metal frame, but it also became an opportunity to showcase the infusion of design in the case of these wire cut chairs or stools that become a bench, as well as also some stone sculpture pieces that were all part of this to showcase, again, these capabilities and possibilities. After many years of working with Marmomac, there was an opportunity to transcend that event and to actually, in tandem with my architectural practice, to create a studio, a design studio that focused on some of these things that I was able to do in Marmomac, which was to focus on stone furniture. And so my feeling was that maybe the foundation of that should be creating what I called an essential stone collection. And the basic idea was to create a singular piece that could be the central piece in each of different rooms, either in a residence, in a commercial space, or in hospitality. You know, it could be a lounge table, it could be a dining table, a desk, a bookcase, something that would be essential for any of those. And in this case, looking at travertine in particular, and then starting to break it down, literally trying to understand what would the component pieces be. And as I was doing this, I started reaching out to some of the same companies that I had been working with, so that we could do fabrication and continue the collaboration, and also expanding it. And I thought that if there was an essential detail that one of these fabricators could come up with, maybe it would begin this mock-up would become a conversation. Here you can see on the desktop a number of pieces. And one of the companies that I ended up working with turned out to be a Turkish company, and it was the perfect combination, because they were responding specifically to what I was trying to achieve, but they also had ideas, and it became this everything I wanted it to be in terms of a dialogue on what might be possible with the stone. So we agreed that it would make sense for me to visit them. So I went to their factory in Bilecik, Turkey, which is like 2 hours, a little bit over 2 hours outside of Istanbul. And it's actually where the Ottoman Empire began. It's right on the Silk Road. So it's a very interesting historical location. But it's in this factory that I was able to really talk to the engineers, talk to the developers, the people that were working with the material, and begin to see what are the different possibilities in terms of combining solid pieces of stone and various laminations of stone, and stone to stone and stone to metal. And it really took the research to a whole nother level. And out of that, we developed a few of the first mock-up pieces. Here you see the dining table, which, with the exception of a couple of metal fasteners, and also an epoxy netted fabric that's between two thin pieces of stone. This is all stone. So this is 95. What you're looking at is 95% stone. And the idea was to again create these essential pieces and starting with this idea, could you make furniture that's contemporary, that's lighter, completely out of stone? And you know, taking advantage of those aspects of durability. They got the largest person in the factory to sit on this, but we also had this guy and other people sitting on it. It was clearly very strong, and it fulfilled those aspects. But one thing that still, for me personally, was a little bit short on was the fact that going with all stone made the pieces still too heavy. So staying in Turkey, began to look at possibilities of collaborating with some metal fabricators, in this case in Istanbul, and started to develop this combination of this very thin, light laminate stone in combination with a metal frame, and developed the next round of mock-ups, which was, you know, again, trying to showcase this really the possibilities of getting a much thinner stone using today's possibilities of lamination, and then just developing that in tandem with the metal fabricator. And then here you see the pieces as they're being finished. Just to put a little note here, to notice this particular material. This is a dark olive stone from Turkey, and this becomes an important point as I proceed in this presentation. So here you see the final dining table. It looks like a rendering because the photographer was obsessed with making this look like a rendering, but this is, I assure you, this is actually a photograph that's been heavily doctored around it, as are these. These are pieces that were all shown here in New York City in 2019, really showcasing the possibility with this lamination technique where there's stone on both sides of a very thin piece of stone. And so this is important background because, as I said, that one particular stone, the dark olive, became essential as I was working more and more during the development of the furniture. I was working on this particular project, which is 2100 Penn Avenue, which I'll give you a little bit of background on it. But what I want to talk about is primarily this central element in the public interior, which is this monumental stone stair that comes from Turkish stone. It was fabricated in Turkey. So the project itself is located on Pennsylvania Avenue. It's on the North Campus of George Washington University. And what's important is that because of this unique site, it's really a U-shaped building. And there's, as a result, what developed was a very large atrium space, which you'll see in a moment. And this whole connection to Pennsylvania Avenue became a very important conceptual and spatial connection to build upon. Here in New York City, we have the Flatiron Building, which you see here on the left. In Barcelona, the Casa Milà. Both of these buildings I thought were great precedents for us because of how they address this idea of a very prominent corner. More so in the case of the Casa Milà because it has this truncated facade thanks to Serda's master plan, where at every intersection he would truncate the corners and create these small flat facades. What I saw as a great opportunity was this plasticity of the form, not so much the material in this case, even though we're talking about stone, but this idea of the undulation, so that you are not just being addressed by a form that's coming at you, but you also have this form that's waving, and it's really reaching out and embracing you. And so I'm a huge fan of Alvar Aalto, both because of his study as his work as an architect, but also work as a designer. And the alto vase I thought was appropriate in terms of its qualities of this undulation. In tandem with that was this idea of just thinking about Pennsylvania Avenue itself and the idea of what the name Pennsylvania Avenue means, which comes back to the state of Pennsylvania. And it's interesting, it's no accident that this is a very prominent avenue in Washington, D.C. Thomas Jefferson was very careful to make a nod to Pennsylvania because there were many who didn't think that the capital should have come to Washington, D.C. So instead, the idea was, well, why don't you, instead of it going to Philadelphia, why don't you bring Pennsylvania to Washington, D.C. by creating this very prominent avenue? And the site is actually located there. But to the point that I'm trying to make is that it became an opportunity for this interior to celebrate this connection to not just Pennsylvania, but the idea of this forest, which it's named after. And in this case, you can see that, again, looking at some precedents here again with Alto, this idea of this waving wood. And what was really important as this developed more and more was a grounding to this wavy wood. And that was almost like a stream going through this, to do this the way that a stream can carve a mountain and carve the rock. And that was the concept that emerged for the stair itself, studying the way that you could get this elevational change, but also really embrace that. And to play with some of the things that Gurkan was talking about, and I think some of the things that we'll continue to talk about, both Paul and Jeremy were touching upon it. This idea of texture and color, and this stone that I was telling you, this dark olive. What I really liked about it, and you could see it here in the rendering, is that a single stone could have different aspects to it. It could celebrate the different colors that are imbued in the stone. In this case, the lighter gray that you see is a result of a texturing of the surface, and the darker is by a polishing of the surface. And then playing with it further, some of the things that Gurkan was showing you, this kind of patterning. So it's not trying to imitate nature. It's trying to emulate the qualities of nature and really celebrate the possibilities of patterning in a very contemporary way. So it was very important to me to go to the quarry, and the quarry itself is located in the center of Turkey, in an area called Sivas. And you could see these different, even by wetting it, you can kind of create the effect of the polishing of the stone. And here, working with the fabricator as well as with the installer and the client, we had a mock-up made to get to make sure we were understanding. There was a collective understanding of expectations of what were going to be the qualities of the texture, what were going to be the resulting colors and surface features. And through a number, I think we had 4 or 5 dry lays, we laid out the entire field of stone for this lobby, and built up all of the walls and the stair itself, so that we could see how these were all working together in tandem. And then here you can see it. This is actually, these are installation photos that were taken just a few weeks ago. At this point, the majority of the floor has been installed. Here you can see them doing some of that installation. And you can see that combination of this reading like it's a solid block of stone that's been carved, but clearly with a nod or a wink with the infusion or the weaving of this pattern, just to the kind of take advantage of another level of expression. We also were able to carry that not just in the lobby itself, but also in the bathrooms. And again, here, this is the same material, it's dark olive. And I think this is a great way to think of this material and to think of stone in general, is that it's through the texturing that you can really begin to demonstrate and capture the light and the color variations. And I think that's really at the heart of what on this particular project with this particular material is something that I'm very happy we were able to achieve. Still continuing to work with the same company, and it's interesting, Gurkan was showing at the end of his presentation a project here in New York City which uses these panel systems. I think that's something that I know we're not really talking about what's happening behind the scenes, but it's also a very big part of what's making stone possible today, is not just what you could do on the surface, but what you can do to kind of augment some of the things that traditionally have made it more difficult to work with. And that is the fact that it is very durable, but it can be very heavy. And if you team it with another material, there are great opportunities for making it more accessible for more applications. And as they say in Turkey, teşekkürler. Thank you.
Craig, thank you very much for that. A wonderful presentation and a kind of very different and excellent follow-up to Gurkan's earlier thing. I guess we have 5 or 6 minutes left on this webinar. Gurkan, I just want to deal with a couple of technical questions that have come in from the audience, which I think you can deal with very briefly. One is, are there any structural systems that are particularly suitable for stone cladding? I'm guessing the answer to that is that, you know, any sort of structural material can be adapted to take stone.
Yeah, I mean, with natural stone tiles on building facades, the mechanical anchorage systems, obviously both hand and basically screwed in, but I think the key challenge there is for taller buildings, depending on how tall your building is. Then you have issues of how thick your pieces of stone are. So these are balances one needs to make depending on how much of the facade you want to clad, how tall your building is, the thickness, different opportunities there. And I think these kind of back ventilated facades, I think a little bit more present more opportunities these days, because you don't have to necessarily do a whole building. You can do sections of it, and I think you still get that natural stone quality without having to worry about, you know, the famous problem of turning the corner, which Craig kind of mentioned. There's always this problem in architecture where you can get these fields. So I think these opportunities to use mechanical anchorage and fixing systems depend on the overall height and width of your building and the kind of expressive qualities you want to give.
Thank you. The second one from Nisrina Iskandar in Indonesia, and this isn't about weight or size. This is about stones or that may be particularly suitable working in hot and humid climates. Now, I'm guessing Turkey is hot. So stone works in hot climates, but what about humid climates? What about the tropics? Does stone respond well to that? Are there particular stones that are more suitable?
Tropics, you have the there's surface treatments of the of things like marble. I think you need to be more aware of how much, because marble will take in some water, as will travertine, and that can kind of, it's a long-term issue. So the harder marbles, I think, would be more appropriate. Some of the dolomites that I showed, where the crystal physics of it prevents a certain water getting into the into your stone bits. But you know, with regard to the examples I've seen in the tropics, also certain volcanic stones, igneous stones, such as these basalts and andesites. They're very, very durable stones. They're not as polished, but I think they do give opportunities to really weather over time and require less, even if the water gets into them, they require less maintenance. So I think those two stones, harder than marble dolomites, and then particular types of volcanic stones, I think for the tropics would be more recommended.
Thank you very much. Jeremy, I wanted to bring you in because of your own interest in art and sculpture as well as architecture, and perhaps make a comment on what you heard from Craig, because this is an unusual presentation. I mean, I know people who trained as architects who became sculptors, and I know architects who collect sculptors, but I think it's really quite unusual to have somebody who's both a live architect and a live sculptor. And I wonder if any thoughts that emerged during that presentation about this sort of relationship.
Well, I think it's an extremely interesting one, and despite all the sort of noise and flannel around the relationship between art and architecture, actually there are very few really specific studies I'm aware of about the relationship between sculpture and architecture. I think one of the few was done by Penelope Curtis, who was one of our speakers last year, the curator initially at the Henry Moore Institute, then at Tate Britain, and latterly at the Gulbenkian in Lisbon. But I think I had two main thoughts really, Craig, while we were talking. One was, we've just had an exhibition here in London of Noguchi, who of course was both a consummate sculptor and a consummate furniture designer. And most of the sculpture I'm aware of, at least, is stone. I'm not sure he ever used it in furniture design or furniture production, but still there's something of the forms that he uses and you use, which I think suggests an affinity. But the other thing, and I think even stronger than the affinity with Noguchi, is the sense that one gets in the Accademia Gallery in Florence of the incomplete sculptures that Michelangelo was making for the tomb of, I think, Julius II, his patron.
The prisoners.
And in them, you know, these are unfinished lumps of stone in which you can see a human figure beginning to emerge or being released by Michelangelo's sort of stonemasonry skill. And I think that's an extraordinary sense of how you can wrest something from this natural object, this stone, which has all sorts of qualities, and all sorts of qualities which we can't really control ourselves. You can only allow it to be what it wants to be by the use of your skill and your judgment. And I found that one of the most moving experiences of going to an art gallery, and I've been to a few, and it's still, even though I haven't been there for 20 years, it stays in my mind as something quite extraordinary, because it really is something about the physical and spiritual, something about form and meaning, and something about experience, about empathy, that one empathizes with these souls trapped in the stone that Michelangelo was trying to free. So those, not that relates directly to your building on Pennsylvania Avenue, but those are senses I think that one can get of the potential of stone to become an expressive material. And I think the way you use it, Pennsylvania Avenue, was quite magnificent in all sorts of different ways. You said it, from its light reflecting qualities to its textures to its massive qualities. And I think that's something that architects would do well to consider more closely than often they do.
Craig, any comment?
Yeah, I mean, wow. What I would say about touching upon what you're saying, Jeremy. First of all, Noguchi, his museum and his studio is about a mile from where I started my my stone design company, and I'm a huge fan of his as a not just as a designer and a sculptor, but also as a landscape designer, or really a placemaker, in the way that he used stone in placemaking. I think it's pretty amazing. In the case of Michelangelo, also, I'm very enamored with not just his incredible skill for the pieces that are usually showcased, but for the very ones that you're talking about, like The Prisoner, and also his Pietà that's in Milan. Partly it's kind of an indulgence on my part, because you can see kind of the process. You can see the natural rock, and you can see how through the tools Michelangelo is working with it. And I think that's true with Noguchi, and that's very much the sensibility that I'm very interested in. The more I work with stone, is letting the textures come forward, letting the qualities of the natural material come forward in different ways, and not just impose a preformed idea on the material, but really respond to the natural qualities, because I think that's how you really amplify the use of stone.
I think that's rather a good note on which to bring this webinar to a close. I've been intrigued by it, as I'm sure our visitors from around the world have been. And I'm struck by certain connections which were very unexpected for me. For example, Gürkan, you were showing these stone crafted building facades of buildings which had actually been incorporated into the geology and the topography of their surroundings from millennia ago, which would seem such a strange idea to us now. But in a way, that it sort of exemplified the possibility of exploiting the natural, or let's say responding to the natural in one sense, but then exploiting it by taking something from these materials and transforming them, going on to Craig's presentation, either by sculptural and craft skills, or probably more relevant for most architects, through the sort of technologies which are opening up new worlds for stone. No longer does it have to support its own weight. It can be a thin, translucent, almost lightweight material, especially where used in combination with quite simple technologies and simple other materials. And I was also struck by, let's say, the relationship between a hybrid facade system where you may be using stone for effect and for light. What lies behind it is support, ventilation, and air, and different materials. And then in your own furniture work, your explorations into seeing that actually, rather than making everything of stone, however attractive that might be in the sense of everything being authentic, that the power of the hybrid to combine things ends up with something which is just as beautiful, but has a sort of different league in terms of practicality and weight, and I guess mobility. So I didn't quite imagine that all these thoughts would arise when we were talking about this seminar, and I think that it just goes to show that an exploration of a powerful material like stone, which I think we all think is rather not so much underestimated, but shall we say unexamined in terms of really profound possibilities of how it can be used in different circumstances. And I was reminded as a sort of final point that Emre Aralat's beautiful mosque, which won an award at World Architecture Festival a few years ago, was one of those examples where the combination of tradition and modernity, architecturally speaking, was echoed in the use of, you know, an eternal material like stone, but then on the other hand, the addition where appropriate of concrete. And it's surely this synthesis of ideas, materials, techniques, and aesthetics, which might be said to be really the world in which architecture operates at its best. So may I thank Turkish Stones for making this webinar possible. Thank you very much, Gürkan Karakuz.
Thank you.
And Craig Copeland for your contributions today. And I hope this conversation about stone will continue at World Architecture Festival and elsewhere. And thank you very much for your time today.